Wuchang Fallen Feather had a very weird controversy. As a Chinese-made fantasy Dark Soul-like game set in China, people had a lot of anticipation following the success of Black Myth Wuchang. But after the game's release, it met with a bit of a controversy. Many people in the West played the games, and generally speaking, the reception to it is positives when it comes to the gameplay and the atmosphere. However, it did have a rough launch with reported technical issues that have heavily hampered player experience, and also had a pretty rough sudden difficulty spike, with the infamous Commander Honglan. But there's one controversy regarding the game that is not started in the West, but in its home country, China, and later affected the game's international image. A Chinese culture war topic. Now, unlike the West, China doesn't have a strong visibility of culture wars due to the Chinese government's more strict regulation on any unsanctioned, unruly behaviors, but the culture wars are still there and oftentimes found online among people's comment sections or various forums. It looks like no matter how homogeneous society is, there will always be someone who tries to find something to start culture wars over. Some Chinese players were very angry about the game's fictional depictions of the 17th century China, accusing it of avoiding historical accuracy. And their evidence is apparently the game didn't make any reference or presentation of the Manchu Chinese Qing dynasty brutality in the regions, omitting history in an effort to appease modern cultural sensibilities, and intentionally only presenting the Han Chinese as murderers and monsters of other Han Chinese. They are very angry about the supposed smearing of the Ming dynasty as well, as they are major enemy factions to the player. Many Chinese gamers online mock the director of the game as a Manchu loyalist, allegedly even go as far as reporting the game to the Chinese government, accusing the game developer for violating the harmony of ethnic unity and historical revisionism. While there are reports of government investigation following the public backlash, it is unclear if they actually did anything. However, they genuinely did create an environment of intense public pressure. The developer of the game eventually caved in and altered a few aspects of the game to appease the Chinese gamers. The released patches made certain historically based enemy unkillable, such as the Ming General, the resurrected Last Emperor of Ming, and they altered how the game story goes, with later chapters Ming army soldier become allied with the player. These sudden changes, trying to appease the Chinese gamer, end up angering Western player base as they see it as a form of censorship. It is also worth noting that the game does not actually have a mainland China versions when these changes are made. The changes are done to the international version of the game. But with all that being said, was the game really historically inaccurate? Was it really the developer trying to omit the history and only paint the Ming Dynasty and Han Chinese rebel as the bad guys? Well, the game's English title is called Wuchang Fallen Feather. The Chinese title is actually called Mingmo Fallen Feather. The term Mingmo specifically denotes the era near the end of the Ming Dynasty, which began in 1644 following the death of the last Ming Emperor, and ended with the Manchu Qing Dynasty of unifications of all of China in 1663. The game is set in 1647 in the land of Shu, which is modern-day Sichuan province. The reason why we know it is set in sometime in 1647 because the developer has stated that the game starts right after the death of rebel leader Zhang Xianzhong. There are two warring factions in the game, in addition to the supernatural enemies like monsters and demons. The first faction is the Ming Remnant Imperial Army, and the other is the rebels. The rebel in games are the historical Da Xijun, or the Great Western Army. This rebel faction in real-life history was a bit of a bloodthirsty. Its real-life leader, Zhang Xianzhong, was recorded by a contemporary Chinese historical source, the Book of Shu, as a very brutal man. Zhang's rebel army conquest of Shu, while initially showed a high level of leniency and compassion toward the local population in an effort to win them over for his new-found dynasty, he quickly abandoned this strategy and turned brutal after he found out the local population was still very loyal towards the Ming remnant imperial forces. One of the well-known brutality conducted by the Zhang's rebel army was his massacre of the city of Chengdu in July of 1645, 2 years before the game set place. The detail of the massacre was quite harrowing. It began on September 15th, 1645. Following a recent defeat by the Ming remnant, he was unable to defend the city of Chengdu, so Zhang conducted a scorched earth policy with his retreat. He began the massacre by ordering his soldiers rounding up all the men in the city, tie them in pairs, and lead them out of the southern city gates to a nearby river and start killing them in pairs. The body piled up so badly that it clogged the river, and Zhang had ordered his soldiers to go downstream to clear the bodies. The smell of blood and death was intense. After 2 days of killing, they finally killed all the men in the city. The rebel began to round up all the elderly, women, and children, forcing them out of the city. He then decided to kill all the women by drowning them, forcing them into river. After he killed everyone in the city, he then ordered his soldiers to loot all the valuables left in the city. Not even his soldiers apparently dared to pocket anything for themselves out of fear of being brutally killed. Even his own men are scared of him. After looting, he then ordered the entire city be burned to the ground. This was just one of Zhang's alleged massacre. He also ordered a decimation of his own soldiers in 1647, out of fear for any recruit that is local who are potentially disloyal towards him. So he purged his own army of anyone who are a local recruit by killing them. With all these atrocities, no wonder this is a very interesting pick for a Dark Souls-like settings. Now I understand at this point people might have some skepticism of such comically evil man. While I agree there might be some exaggerations and most likely is tainted by propaganda from the later Ming and Qing imperial forces to make themselves look better and more legitimate. The brutality was not only recorded in contemporary Chinese history, but also European Jesuit missionaries, Italian Lodovico Bagiglio and Portuguese Gabriel Magellan. I'm pretty sure I said those names incorrectly. A fun fact there is a Jesuit missionaries NPC in Wuchang Fallen Feather actually does exist.
全能的天主父啊，我信罪过的赦免，我信肉身的复活，我信永恒的生命。阿门。你的羽毛，你也受主蒙恩。不，你有理智？难道你是？全能的主，感谢你领我来此，使我与使者相见。使者，请告诉我主的旨意。是我还不够虔诚，没有资格见证主的降临吗？你不是使者。等大希望以圣子之身复生，他必将神国的光辉播撒至众人。那时，我也会长出慈父的羽翼。你这冒充使者的魔鬼，休想引我堕入撒旦的网眼。
So Zhang's brutality and the truthfulness of the claim the rebel became a bloodthirsty monster is credible. On top of this, during the 2-year span between 1645 and 1647, the land of Shu also had other disasters such as plague, famine. There was also a tiger epidemic where tigers in the region became very active and killed many people as well. The Ming Dynasty remnants, on the other hand, during this time period, were also just busy fighting to retain their own warlord status. Ming remnant forces were not recorded to have done any large-scale atrocity, but they also didn't do anything to help the locals. The brutality of the Daxi rebel, the indifferences of the imperial soldiers, and various disasters all are actually thematically presented in-game, with many NPCs who lamented the death of the last Ming Dynasty emperor, fall of the imperial government, the fear of monsters, which is corresponding to the tigers epidemic, rebels, and with the imperial soldiers, unable or unwilling to help protect the local population, and sometimes even contribute to local suffering. I would say that the game did a pretty good job of thematically consistent with the mainstream historical account. Of course, being a video game, they've taken a lot of artistic liberty, but in general, they actually did, in my personal opinion, a pretty good job of artistically interpret the historical time period. Now, so far I only talk about the rebel atrocity, the Ming dynasty's indifferences, but what about the Qing dynasty? Did they commit any atrocity? Isn't that what Chinese gamers are mad about? Yes, the Qing dynasty did commit atrocity of their own. But here's the thing, the Qing army went the land of Shu around the spring of 1647. The game took place, theoretically, is the same time as Qing Imperial Army just entering the land of Shu. It is very likely the absence of the Qing Dynasty Imperial forces simply because they haven't reached where the MC is located. After all, Sichuan province is huge. In fact, the Qing Dynasty forces didn't completely pacify Sichuan province from the Ming Dynasty remnant until 1660. Did the Qing Dynasty commit atrocity? Yes, but it's very likely that are also outside the scope of the game's setting. The supposed smearing of the Ming Dynasty is also completely unfounded. And why is anyone still a fanboy over an imperial dynasty that is gone for over 400 years? Did these people not realize that even the Qing dynasty is gone by now? The Qing and the Ming, they're all gone. Qing dynasty collapsed 100 years ago, while Ming 400 years ago. So this game did a good job of capturing the apocalyptic vibe, and is historically authentic for the time period. In addition, the developers themselves are from Chengdu, the one city that got razed to the ground by the Han Chinese rebels. It only makes sense why they choose to focus more thematically without the Qing dynasty. With all of that being said, it ultimately is a fantasy game with a side dish of Gunnerbay.